Hi, everybody, and welcome to Kremlin File. Hey, Olga, you got your coffee? Are you ready?
Yes, my espresso today. More than
you got
coffee.
Espresso.
Yes.
Oh, dear. Okay, well, I have mine in here as well because that's all we have here in Italy. Anyway, Olga, we got a fabulous episode today. We're going to be speaking with Mr. John Foley, and he's a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel. And he had, let's say, a career in the armed forces for 27 years. Former career intelligence officer in various theaters in Iraq, for example, also in the NORAD-USNORTHCOM, and also task forces in the U.S. Marine Corps and the U.S. Army. And they were relating, and this is where it becomes really interesting, cyber threats, counterintelligence, and extremism, which is a huge topic, right, Olga, in this moment?
Yes. And he will also be covering the problem we have, the domestic terrorists with our militia groups in America. I mean, we've seen the threat they pose basically during the Trump years leading up to, and then the role they played on the Capitol attack on January 6th.
Yep.
And here we will be discussing with him how Russia over the past decade took interest in these militias, and as well as how they have been running influence and disinformation operations on our military. And that's why we saw not so many, but that's why we saw military members involved in January 6th insurrection. And, how they sided with Trump over various issues over the past, few years.
No, it's a really, I know that he's written also about this.
Yes.
It's a huge issue. Knowing that, for example, amongst a lot of the people that were attacking the Capitol on January the 6th, as you said, so many people who were part of or ex-military.
Yeah.
And he's had experience with that. He knows what he's talking about when it's this kind of thing, extremism, and how it was how it grew inside and then.
And he actually watched it unfold inside while he was serving, and he saw his, colleagues suddenly start, spreading disinformation without realizing that they're spreading Russian disinformation.
Yeah, exactly. So without any further ado, let's welcome John to the podcast. John, welcome to Kremlin File. Okay, and thank you for bringing your insights today to us, and that you're going to be speaking all about the intelligence community. And one thing that we wanted to start with was, I was reading about the actual January 6th coup and about coups in general. And there are 7 factors that are usually present in order for a coup to be successful. And today we're actually going to be talking about one of these aspects in a roundabout way, but it has to do with the military. As expressed in an open letter, from 10 former defense secretaries and then reiterated by General Milley before the November 2020 presidential election, the military is supposed to be apolitical. They're not beholden to just the president itself, but to the Constitution. Okay, this is what this is, right? Our democratic, system. And it's just not in the States, it's wherever there is a democratic, Constitution. But there are some disturbing signs. This is what we're going to be talking about today, and how Russia wields its influence, in foreign militaries. So no longer in its own territory, but outside of Russia. This is what we're going to get into. Now, I don't want to jump ahead. Olga and I wanted to sort of step back just a bit. And we'd like to begin our discussion with Yugoslavia. What lessons did Putin learn with the breakup of Yugoslavia? And how is it relevant to what is happening today, let's say in terms of tactics and other issues that are connected to that? John?
Great question, Mo. And what's fascinating about Yugoslavia is that the U.S. military spent most of the 1990s dealing with Bosnia, Kosovo. We had the war with Serbia. And largely the American military did a big, what we call in the Army, a brain dump, and they moved on to the next mission, especially after September 11th. And a lot of our important lessons from there were forgotten. But the Russians did not forget it. Yugoslavia was organized not as a big military. They had a very good military, but it was broken down into, most soldiers were territorial defense units, or but, and what they did is that everyone had their weapon at home. So if we were all Yugoslavians, we'd all have our assault rifle at home, our stock of ammo, and then when called up, we would be a people's militia, and we'd come out and we'd defend the country. Well, as the ethnic tension started ripping apart the country, everyone grabbed their weapon, and now it's like, wow, oh, you're a different group, so now everyone's fighting because the weapons were there. So the amount of weapons just helped fuel and ignite the breakup of Yugoslavia and the violence. So, and that, and then another key part of the breakup is the fundamental, and I'm going to kind of circle around to this topic in my other responses, and that is a rejection of federalism. The Yugoslavia broke up because the Serbians and some of the more militant factions did not want federalism. They wanted their regional ethnic areas. So that's what I talked about when I wrote about Yugoslavia in my one article.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. So the proliferation of arms, right, into smaller units. This was fundamental, breaking up anti-federalism. This was also a key factor. Okay.
Yes.
And then there were also divides within the nation.
Yes.
Along ethnic lines, religious lines. I mean, we know, right? We followed, right? That whole thing. Yeah. Yeah. So let's move on. Olga, you have another question as well, right?
Yes. So I came across your work years ago, and you had written an amazing article in Euromaidan Press, which honestly, I was like, wow, somebody actually put focus to it. And it was on Russia's role with when it came to American militias, and particularly 3%ers and Oath Keepers, who we see are now under indictment for their role in the Capitol attack.
The Russian tie-in to these groups, it's classic subversion, because these are already disaffected folks that, with a little bit of Russian nudging with information operations, just really help to, it's like an ember that's in a fire, and you just blow on it and it glows and glows, and then it like explodes into a flame. But the issue with these two groups, Oath Keepers and 3%ers, is that they formulate from two basic things. One is you see the folks at the Capitol with their yellow "Don't Tread on Me" flags.
Right.
Those are affiliated with the Tea Party movement that came in the early 2000s. And they're a very interesting bunch for people to research, and I highly recommend people dive into that. But they come out of a radical libertarianism, and it really came out about here in the West, places like Idaho, Nevada. You get the Clavin Bundy kind of guys. And some of it even goes back to the 1990s. But the real trigger event was the election of President Obama, and their collective heads exploded. And so you had, within a month of him being elected, both the Oath Keepers organized and the 3%ers organized. And they are a militia movement, and their justification was that the president is going to take our guns away. Now, Russia had nothing to do with these groups springing up, but what they saw is a target-rich environment. And it was perfect for them because they could spread their message. Things like the tough guy image Putin likes to put off.
Right.
And then you got and they would often compare him to Obama, and then like tough guy Putin, and and they really like authority figures, and Putin fit right in there. And then it gets into the issue of they too reject federalism. Remember Yugoslavia.
Mm-hmm.
These folks are all about rejecting the federal government, even though many of them work for the federal government, which is kind of a really interesting situation. But they're all about states' rights, fundamentally about states' rights. Now, the other important part of which I've written at length about is how much they're opposed to Black Lives Matter or any social justice issue related to people of color. They will come out and oppose. They're also extremely, extremely anti-Islam and anti-Muslim.
Yeah.
Okay. And, going back to another issue is that they have made it their point to be the defenders of Confederate monuments. Remember when the monuments started coming down?
The whole
These groups all started going, grabbing their guns and surrounding them to protect Confederate memorials.
Yep.
And it's very disturbing with that adage. And then the other disturbing thing is that they actively recruit among police forces and military forces, whether it's active guard and reserve. And which is, again, subversion 101. I mean, this is simple subversion tactics. But I want to just close out with this question is that my definition of what I term these groups is I put them in a classification of, I call them neo-Confederates, because they fall in line with sort of a ideology that is propping up a Confederate States of America 2.0.
Right.
So.
And John, how do they transmit, let's say, or broadcast or diffuse their messages? Okay. Like how does Russia get the messages into, let's say the press that these guys read onto social media? What kind of themes do they deal with? How is it done?
Like gun forms. Gun forms is a huge one. I mean, I'm a big gun owner and I follow a lot of this and I'll see a lot of the propaganda formulating on there and they put it out. And when you look at a site like Veterans Today or RT, the nefarious news sites will go out and put the information out there. And then it's a couple steps removed from the original Russian source. They're probably starting around 2012 is when I started seeing this myself, working at my desk, working intelligence work, and having people who are in the intelligence community who are working stuff about Russia, who then at home on your time off, you're getting shared from them on Facebook a message about, isn't Putin cool? Oh, look at the famous, remember the famous meme, Putin versus Obama? And it, showed Obama wearing a bike helmet and then it shows, Obama, the bike helmet and Putin doing something macho. I forget. I have it around here somewhere, but so all sorts of ways that they can just disseminate it. Most social media things have been better, but there's still just regular websites now.
There's still a lot out there. Yeah.
And to touch on Veterans Today, even according to our State Department report, they're affiliated, they were merged with, forgot the name of the outlet, which is the Front for Russian Intelligence. And to add to Veterans Today, I think most scary part besides them, brainwashing veterans is that they offer assistance in finding jobs, which again, now Russia is able to collect your address, your phone number, and pretty much, and kind of get information on you. And that's being fed right back. And
I'd raised this issue back in, I want to say 2016.
Wow.
At Fort Carson. And eventually, I think it was by 2017, DOD through their computer networks had made it an unavailable site to get to from a work site. within a DoD domain.
Thank goodness.
But it was, the damage was already done. People like putting their resumes out there on, this job posting site. And it's very scary how they can get their claws into you. So.
And to touch on Obama, I can tell you from the Russian side, I remember the minute they saw, division happening right after election, because, you had like this first time in American history, well, not American history, in current history, American history, where you had this immediate divisiveness. And I can say that on the Russian side, they immediately saw that, and they actually sent a few Russians to start, kind of getting closer to militia groups, to NRA, to church groups, religious groups. And that's when you see them really, really, really zone in, especially, they had invaded Georgia right prior to Obama being inaugurated. And they saw there was no response, and they kind of felt even bolder. And then they see this divisiveness, taking shape. And it was actually very strong, because I remember they were burning like effigies of Obama. And here they were immediately were like, oh, let's send our advisors over. Let's see how we can help, basically. And you see the target towards which led to Trump actually start taking shape in 2009. Right after the election.
Yes.
And that's when you see the Russians really putting their focus on United States and causing this major division on everything, whether it's gun rights, abortion, within military, everything, anything that they could find where they saw, they would they grabbed onto it.
Well,
and then after that, they started wheeling all these people to Russia, like, oh, here, come, we'll pay for a trip.
Yeah,
for you.
and they, that's where I, my comment about it being a target-rich environment, because they saw all these groups. One that I really want to talk about, because the Russians are good at tapping into the conspiracy theory side of stuff, which, we can get into. But we have to discuss the whole George Soros thing, because it's fundamental to the discussion of disinformation. And that is, okay, so George Soros, the billionaire from, was it Hungary or something? But he runs these pro-democracy foundations. Now, there's a fascinating book out there that people should read. This was published by the Chinese. It was written in 1999, and it was called Unrestricted Warfare. And it was basically an examination of how the United States waged war. And they focus on information warfare in there. But of all the stuff they analyzed, the number one threat they determined to Chinese was not like our missiles, not our aircraft carriers, not our army, not our navy. It was George Soros. They call him out by name and his pro-democracy. And they've always had authoritarian governments who are trying to keep the lid on a massive population. And so ideas like democracy are extremely, that's the most dangerous idea. Just look at Hong Kong. By the early 2000s, the Russians picked it up. And you can go online, and Putin despises George Soros. And the information warfare messaging that has gone out has been George Soros is this evil guy. So you got the two most authoritarian governments in the world complaining about George Soros, and they have fed this to these people in America who view George Soros as some sort of, they call him a Nazi, all these
Antichrist.
Yeah, all this stuff. And they're basically doing the work of Russian intelligence by because what does this do? This impacts things like Navalny and other pro-democracy activists. And this is why you've had this sapping of support for pro-democracy activists worldwide, because you have a significant segment of the U.S. population who is bought into this lie. Forget the, stop the steal and mass stuff and Corona. The nugget of information is this whole thing with Soros. Now, I'm not trying to, I don't know the guy, I don't follow his, organization that well, but I know when the People's Liberation Army makes it a point to single a certain guy out, then, we need to kind of take a look at this.
Pay attention to what, exactly.
So, and that's,
yeah, and it was also a means to because he was funding, and helping democracies flourish.
That is, in the intelligence world, we look at indicators, and I could be in a crowd and be I could be at a kid's soccer match, and and just that you could ask the question, "What do you think of George Soros?" You automatically have down the path, and you can start getting indicators. It's sort of like asking, a Muslim how they feel about, bin Laden or something. And it's, it's a key indicator of some very disturbed people and how they don't value democratic principles.
Yep.
Definitely.
100%. Scary. Very scary. We need to fight back. I wish our governments, both in Europe and U.S., actually, realize, because I don't think they realize, that Russia is hijacking people's minds. You know, I mean, with everything that they do, the biggest thing is them hijacking their minds. And even during last election, I have a son, and he would come to me, and he's younger and he's on TikTok, and he comes to me and asks me all these disturbing questions about Biden. Is he a pedophile? Is this happening? Is that? And I'm like, where are you hearing this shit? And he's like, oh, it's on TikTok. And I'm like, I can't believe it. They're targeting our children.
In general, right? Even this veterans group that you've just mentioned, there's so many of them. What do you think the overall objective is in targeting the military specifically? Well,
that is, I love this question because I break it down into the reason they're targeting it is it kind of falls into two categories, internal and external, meaning the U.S. military at home, and then the U.S. military, what kind of missions it does. And it's interesting because when you get into the people who've been in the military a long time or have studied the history of the Army going back, they might understand some aspects of our society and our military, but because the military is held up as this example of, some of the first to integrate, African Americans and break the color barrier and stuff. But the Russians recognize this racial tension. They always have, even going back to Soviet days, they would try and do propaganda to stir that pot. And they understand that these groups, which a lot of people consider them white supremacist groups, they are, as I've talked about, extremely anti-Black Lives Matter. Matter of fact, if you ever want to get a crowd of 3% or Oath Keepers or any of the militia groups, just organize a large-scale Black Lives Matter protest, and they will show up. They'll come out of the woodwork. That happens here in Colorado quite frequently.
And Russia does that. Russia will on Facebook schedule
events
in order to cause.
But so the issue is trying to cause trouble there racially within our armed forces, because it's something that if you keep at it, you can get a little bit of traction. Then there's the issue of the anti-vaxxers. Matter of fact, yesterday there was a story run by Colorado Public Radio. They went down to Fort Carson, actually just off post. We're visiting some restaurants and coffee shops. And there's a very big issue of soldiers not wanting to be vaccinated. Now, we know Russia has been very much in the spreading the anti-vax propaganda. But this gets into issues like military readiness, because people think of the U.S. military as being all our weapons and stuff. One of our greatest weapons we have that people don't think about is our fantastic medical support. And then, I look at the external part of what they might be doing. And this might sound a little odd, but because these groups are very anti-Muslim, they are also the first ones to talk about really, at their root, they want the U.S. to stay fighting in the Middle East. This is something Russia is very attuned to. Russia itself wants America to stay in the Middle East fighting, because there's an issue within the military, and that is there's what we call coin operations, counterinsurgency, like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then there's this thing called near peer doctrine. Near peer is the ability to fight large scale warfare with conventional forces with like Russia, China. Those are who America's military considers near peers. Well, the Army is known, and I've talked to officers when we'd be sitting in Iraq talking about, we've been here for like 9 years and our Army's degraded into, these coin missions, because the Army, for example, has a very tough time doing coin and then saying, oh, by the way, you've been in Iraq all this time. Now you got to go fight the Russians. They're two total opposite missions. And there's a very degrading point of it that it puts on the forces.
So while we were focused strictly on terrorism and the Middle East, I mean, they were pretty much like infiltrating every country, plotting attacks, beginning attacks, testing everything on their neighbors, and on and on and on.
Yeah.
John, I have a question for you. So, there was an article, very good article, by Washington Post recently about Russia bringing German militia, because militia, people in America think that it's only solely with us, but Russia is propping them up across all of Europe too. So, they were bringing German militia to Russia for training. And those training camps are ineffectively run by GRU, Russia's intelligence services, which is connected to Ministry of Defense, to their Defense Department. Have you seen any signs of them doing the same with Americans, like bringing American militia members over?
I saw that article, and it's a really great article, because I looked at it I have my own take on it. I mean, obviously Europeans don't have the vast access to weapons like in America. There's no reason whatsoever, for the most part, for militia from America to come to Russia and train. Yeah. But there is this interesting aspect that you kind of are getting after, and that is the benefit for the Russians, for the American audience, is the propaganda effect. And it reminds me of this great Russian.
That's what they do in
Ukraine. It was this great Russian information op. They put it out on the gun blogs that I follow. And it was this picture of some Russian high school students who are getting military training, because you know how Putin kind of brought back this like young pioneers attitude. And so these high school students are learning how to disassemble and reassemble a AK-47. Actually, I think it was a AK-74, but never.
Which was done in Russian schools.
Yeah. So
schools.
The kids are doing this, and it's filmed, and it was shared. It was shared to a U.S. gun blog. Nothing wrong with that. I like watching this stuff. I watch a lot of Russian YouTube stuff, and what was interesting is that the comments that got picked up by the American audience, and it became, look at what they're doing in Russia. In America, what are we doing? And it basically became this, because this was a few years ago, it was a discussion about, see, they're learning how to handle weapons, where in our curriculum, kids are learning Common Core, which sucks, and all this kind of stuff. And it became this argument attacking our education system, which is really quite amazing, because, going back to subversive techniques, the common way to subvert a society is going after, what did the VC in, Vietnam do? They took over schools, they got involved in that stuff. If teachers didn't cooperate, they got assassinated if they weren't going to. Yeah. And so same thing goes in this mentality. It's like they're attacking the school system. And we see this today. Matter of fact, here in Colorado or across the country, there are like 3%ers showing up at these school board meetings complaining about the masks.
Yeah.
And they do it here in Colorado. There's militia guys who show up at the meetings. I haven't seen any bring their guns, but they're there because people have reported.
Sure.
In Michigan, they wanted to kidnap the governor and execute her on live TV, nonetheless. So,
they're going to a micro level, John. Right? They're starting right at the grassroots. If you think about it.
Yeah,
right?
because
going to a school
really
board
gets
meeting. I mean, you're not going to, let's say, the governor thing, fine, but
like a right to bear arms.
And Olga had a great point with the Michigan. Had a great because your point is, grassroots level, getting in the community. Where do you go? School board meeting.
Exactly.
The Michigan stuff, not even the governor kidnapping plot, but just the armed protest about showing up with your guns to protest. And this is something that people really don't understand.
It was a prelude to the Capitol attack.
But showing up to protest with a gun, people really don't grasp the concept that's going on here. Because, matter of fact, I have one of my old intelligence school manuals on when you're taught in the intelligence, service about terrorism. And let me read this definition here because it makes a perfect point. And this is out of Army Regulation 525-13, defines terrorism as the calculated use of force or the threat of violence to inculcate fear intended to coerce or even to intimidate government societies in the pursuit of goals that are generally political, religious, or ideological. And the key phrase all there is intimidate. They are doing things to intimidate. So when you are doing an armed action designed to intimidate a state legislature
at the state
capitol, that is a form of terrorism. That people miss this whole point because what are the key there's three key aspects to getting insurgency going. One is access to weapons. America has like 300 million plus weapons, access to financing, and then you have access to recruitment. The Russians help them recruit through their social media. Financing is a little bit, tougher, but when you look at how some of these groups raise money, it's something that I would ask the Department of Justice to look at these groups, like how are they getting money?
One thing, John, that you mentioned, that I read from something that you wrote, was that they're buying Russian ammunition. Can you tell us about that? Because I was in shock when I read that. I said, what the hell are these people doing? They're buying Russian ammunition?
So the fact that, but you go on gun sites and you're like shopping for ammunition, and the cheapest ammo out there is Russian.
Wow.
They also massively export AR-15 ammo, which the Russians have never used AR-15s. And so why would our adversary be pumping millions of rounds of ammunition into the American market? Because they know who buys the majority of assault weapon ammo. It's going to be gun enthusiasts who have these weapons, but you're also going to get the militia groups, and they're going to be stockpiling this. I know people who stockpile assault weapons ammunition, so it's kind of a no-brainer.
No, I just find this so bloody absurd.
But the thing
like
is, though,
Americans
is that
are going to kill each other with Russian bullets. You guys are basically giving them the way to do it. It's incredible to me.
And what's amazing, for years I've been an advocate to ban them, even though I would like to have Russian ammo. I see the bigger picture and the danger. And so I hope through my activism, I've had some little bit of, help in getting this Biden ban through. I don't know, maybe not, but I already got people online.
And getting to your point, they send honeypot Butina, who targets NRA.
Yeah.
And I mean, Russia's so concerned about our Second Amendment rights. I mean, meanwhile, go to Russia and try to have this arsenal of weapons for a regular family.
That's a great point, because there's discussions back.
But they're worried about us.
There would be memes
it's like kill
in the
yourselves.
gun community.
First with COVID and then with a Russian bullet. Sorry, guys, but I mean, come on.
And for people who don't know, Butina, before coming to U.S., she was recruited out of Siberia. She actually started with the gun rights movement, which were pro-Russian militia inside of Ukraine. And then her next operation
was in the States.
And that was like probably around 2000, I think, 11, 12. And then her next operation was to come to U.S.
Right. Of course.
Yeah. Getting to the Capitol attack. So, I mean, for anyone who was shocked on what happened on January 6th, clearly was in a coma the past 5 years. They try to run Kamala Harris's bus off the road. And I mean, I'm looking at that scene and I'm like, are we like in the Middle East? I mean, because you don't see, armed militia groups surrounding, a bus and especially like if a campaign person and trying to run it off. I mean, these clearly were terrorist tactics. And then you kind of fast forward to the Capitol attack. Then you saw Putin coming out and, these are political, like, freedom fighters. And meanwhile, like, can you imagine people in Russia can't even step outside to say free Navalny without being beaten and jailed? And here he's like, very excited about what happened with the Capitol. I'm like, yeah, let's see that happening in the Kremlin. They'll shoot those people dead in like a minute. So what did you see any role of Russia? Like, what role did Russia play into that? Well, because clearly there are several things that led Russia.
Well, I look at this from
resulted in the Capitol.
I have a different take. Yours is actually a great take too. But the lenses I'm looking at this, because I've been following the kind of conspiratorial mindset of these conspiracy groups, the conspiracy theory stuff that led to this, it set the conditions for what has come now. And it went all through the 90s into the 2000s. And it's what we call second and third order effects. Russia knows that there's this sediment out there, and people feel a certain way, and they keep, aggravating it and pushing them. Yeah. And so, like in the 90s, remember what happened? We had like Oklahoma City bombing. That was the biggest domestic terrorist attack occurred in our history. And that was the same sort of mentality, and people can exploit it. And so then you get these folks who want to kidnap the governor. They've been subject to this propaganda by the 3%ers and the Oath Keepers and other groups. And at that point, now we start hitting the terrorism and intimidation level of stuff. And then, you get like Stop the Steal people. Matter of fact, on January 6th, that rally, that was supposed to be followed days later with rallies at all state capitals. Matter of fact, there was a bunch of militia groups from here locally that were planning to go. And then after the 6th and the 7th, they put out word like, oh no, the FBI is going to be there and arrest us all. So there was a certain fear factor on their part.
So what happened actually didn't deter them. Thank God. They were just afraid somebody was going to come and actually ID them. Okay.
But, so you have these, they've now moved on to like I said, the school board issue, the mask issue. They are continuing, and the Russians keep pushing, the anti-vaccine message. People are eating it up. And so
they'll get into climate change, because I think that's going to be the next, right?
They're paying influencers to push Russian propaganda. There was an excellent BBC report where they spoke with a few influencers who showed them emails, and there was a company that was a front for that went back to a Russian individual, and they were paying them like, I forgot how many euros. It wasn't, it wasn't pennies, to sit online on YouTube and promote anti-vaccine stuff.
Yeah, it's
exactly. Actually, on the 6th, there were a lot of.
And wait,
go
I just
ahead, love.
wanted to add one thing. Deep state goes back to because I remember I had to interview Kalugin, who used to be head of counterintelligence for KGB, and he said he was putting in deep state, and because he operated on U.S. soil in the 60s and 70s, he said he was putting deep state things, conspiracies in local papers, and back then.
If I'm not mistaken,
with JFK, with Martin Luther King. So they kind of have been putting this deep state forever. And when Trump, interestingly, came up with deep state, I was like, interesting.
I mean, also, I have a question about the 6th and to do with a lot of the military that were present. Okay. There were, I can't remember, I read about it. The certain percentage of people who were actually participating, they were either ex-military, some were actually still in the ranks, so on and so forth. We know about General Flynn, for example, that was out there, getting everybody riled up, all right? And this is being investigated.
Now he's calling for all of our executions.
Yes, exactly.
So
I mean, we know that he's, he's a real character. I mean, character is not the word. First of all, what do you do with someone who's been in national security in his position? Should he not be, what do you do in the military? You take away their ranks? What do you do? I mean, is this allowed? I mean,
there's
speaking from a European, you got a military guy who's out there,
We have to take actions. We got to, go after these folks. And some of the stuff I talked about was first identifying them. You have to identify everybody.
Yeah.
And the government has capability to do that. I'm still kind of amazed that the FBI tip line on Twitter is still like trying to identify pictures when there's software that does that.
I know.
It's like, to me, that's kind of a joke. And then identifying them and then using them to find the hardcore dangerous folks. That's what's really important.
Yeah.
Because some people have a certain, they want their gun rights. Maybe they don't like, certain political agendas by the powers that be, but they haven't gone over full scale into the other side. They're not ready to start blowing up buildings and kidnapping governors and doing acts of terrorism. And that's what we want to get. The key to these things is dealing with it and not ignoring it. And these folks are not going away. They're actually becoming more organized. They're more organized in my town than they were a year ago.
Wow. It's got worse.
Yeah.
So it's right. It's developed into something even worse. Wow.
And going back to like the incident with Michigan and with Texas, them trying to run off, the campaign bus, what steps can be taken like with these militia people?
Well, that was
a
crime, I think. I mean, this is where I expect, I think I read somewhere that it was Ulysses S. Grant. When he was president, he was the one who created the Department of Justice. And it was to fight the resurgent Confederates in the South resisting the implementation of the Reconstruction policies post-Civil War. So you get the rise, and it wasn't just the Klan. The Klan, you had like these other militia groups made up of former Confederates. Like there was the Red Shirts, drawing a blank, but there was different groups. Everyone thinks it's a Klan. There was various militias out there. And the U.S. government was waging a counterinsurgency where they brought in the army and they were defending, the black citizens, the right to vote and stuff, houses of government. I mean, there were like battles fought down south and massacres going on. And it was going until Grant left office and the powers that be politically changed, and the North finally hey, we're just going to let things go and they pulled troops out and let the segregationists take over the South, and they stayed there until the 60s. So, and that's the kind of thing we have to think about is, can we use the Department of Justice more effectively? Like, I want to know what they're doing. And getting into the topic of, I think where you want to go with the military is like, there's things like updating all the regulations that cover these groups, because right now the 3%ers and Oath Keepers do not qualify because they say they're constitutional Second Amendment groups, even though they're anti-Islamic and they're anti-African American. Yeah. They say they allow membership of African Americans, and I think there's some token members, but it's really, a cover. And then there's things like Army counterintelligence. Army counterintelligence, who would look for Russian agents. Why are they not diving into this? Well, I'll tell you, because I have known Army counterintelligence people who are very supportive of these militias. So I can't expect them to police it. But that needs a change. Like, the Department of Justice needs to be talking to police departments that have ties to militia groups. Like, my own town here, the police department has very close ties to some of these militia groups, which is extremely disturbing.
Wow.
There was a case back last year on June 6th where there was a big Black Lives Matter rally. Mm-hmm. And there's a militia group in town locally. They came with about maybe, I don't know, I saw different counts, but maybe up to 30 folks, fully armed, body armor. The police watched and let them set up a sniper overwatch position where the lady I know, who is a reverend, African-American reverend, was given a speech, and you got this sniper overwatching their position. And it was in the Colorado Springs paper. I mean, the Independent ran. Maybe I might send you some link.
Isn't that something Department of Justice can get involved?
That's my question.
Like, why?
But
are you allowing?
They let these folks do this. Matter of fact, some of these militia groups have gone on patrol. There was a case over the summer where they were in vehicles patrolling the streets looking for Antifa, and they pulled into a Lowe's parking lot, and this lady called the police on them. And the police came like, oh, no, it's these guys. And it's the Department of Justice needs to be dealing with this. I mean, and our political leaders need to say, no, enough is enough, because people are going to start getting hurt. People are going to start dying. You're going to have a rally. The Antifa folks in town show up and they have rocks and spray paint cans. The militia shows up. Oh, by the way, the Antifa folks is usually two guys with a broomstick and a red flag on it. And then you got a whole platoon of, 3%ers showing up.
And with a whole
military
facility behind them.
So this brings us to the end, right, of our discussion. But we hope, John, that we're going to be able to talk to you again.
John, where can our viewers find you?
Yes.
And find your work?
I think you've seen me on Twitter. It was Foley for Colorado. Because
Okay, so Foley, Foley, the number 4, Colorado.
And then on my blog is actually called Third Wave Politics.
So everybody, subscribe. Hey everybody, if you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe, and please visit our website, kremlinfile.com. This is Season 1, Kremlin File, hosted by Olga Lautman and me, Monique Camarra. This is a Bunker Crew Media production with executive producers Marley Clements, Jack Bryan, Grant DeSimone, Ben, Brett, and Jordy Mycelis of Midas Media, with associate producers Ruby Frankel and Sarah Metz. Theme music by Oreste Camarra. Sound editing and mixing by Joy Ellett. Subscribe to Kremlin File wherever you listen to podcasts.
I think I'm your most loyal listener, so...
John, when you tweeted about the podcast, that we I know your account forever, and I'm like, oh my god, this is him.
Yay!
I'm blonde. Some